The garden is well kept, the wine is good. The guards stand at a distance, which the Romans consider a kindness, and perhaps it is. I have learned in the years since Civilis raised his banner and the river ran black with Roman blood that the empire's cruelties are mostly the cruelties of architecture. A door that does not open from the inside, a wall too high to see beyond, a city that swallows you so completely you forget the names of trees. I forget nothing. I remember my tower. Not the cold of it, though it could be at times. But it was the cold of a place built to lift one person above the sight of all others. I remember the beautiful silence that collected there, like standing water on the forest lake on a clear morning. The Bructeri brought their questions up the ladder, and I let the silence answer first, because silence frightens men into truth. Mostly they came to me with the small griefs, harvests, fevers, the intentions of neighboring tribes. But once, they came with a war. We burned the winter camps of 2 legions. They took a legate in chains and presented him to me like an offering. And I looked at him for a long time, and I thought, you are afraid of me because I am a woman who lives alone in a high place and speaks in ways you cannot tax or bribe or marry. I gave him back to his people. I don't know why. The gods, perhaps. Or something colder than the gods. The sense that he was not the thing I was waiting for. Civilis is dead, or scattered, or both. The Batavian fields are quiet again. Rome wrote it all down in their careful Latin and called it suppressed, as if a rebellion were a disease. But empires, like people, are mortal. There will be other pestilences, and each one will be harder to recover from than the last. The senator's wife came to see me last month. She stood at the garden wall with her attendants and looked at me the way that Romans look at anything they've defeated and preserved, with that particular pride that is only one layer above pity. She said my prophecies were famous. She said she'd heard I'd once turned the tide of a battle with words alone. She smiled when she said it. It was the smile of a woman handling a relic. And yet, I knew she had never experienced the power I once had, the freedom I once had. She had always lived a life oppressed by men, and this was the only way she could hit something, to make herself feel strong when she never was and never could be. I pity her. I smiled back. I have been practicing Roman smiles. They require the eyes to do nothing. She does not know what I saw last night. I am old now, and the visions come differently. Not like fire anymore, not like the cold certainty of the tower. They come like memories almost. Like something that has already happened and is only now being reported to me from a great distance. I woke before dawn with a smell of smoke that wasn't there, and I lie still on the Roman bed with its Roman linen, and I watched it come. Not us. Not the Bructeri. Not Civilis. Not any of the tribes I knew. Something later. Something enormous. I saw the walls. These walls. The walls that even now ring the city I can see from the garden on clear days. A pale thumb smear on the horizon. I saw them breached. Not by siege engine, by sheer weight, by the accumulated mass of every peoples the Empire had spent 600 years deciding were not quite human enough to matter. Coming home, finally, to collect. I saw it the way you see a tide, unstoppable not because of any single wave, but because of what was behind it, and behind that, and behind that. It will not happen in my lifetime. It may not happen in the lifetime of that senator's wife or her children, but it will happen. The gods showed me, and the gods, whatever else they are patient. This morning, one of the younger guards, he cannot be more than 19, with the ruddy neck of a boy newly arrived from the countryside, leaned against the colonnade and watched me sit in the garden and said something to his companion. I didn't hear it, but I heard them laugh. I looked up at the pale city on the horizon with a smile of my own. I smile with my eyes. I'm Courtney.
And I'm Brandon, and welcome to the Time Travelers Club. So the last few weeks, we have covered every aspect of a woman from the Celtic world. We have talked about their magic, their customs, their practices, roles, and even their symbols, like the mighty Freya. But today, we will get to talk about the rare story we have on a singular woman. Her name was Veleda, and she would be one of many women who gave Rome pause. She vexed them and terrified them, much like the infamous Boudica, Cleopatra, and Zenobia. But who exactly was she? Her story is murky, surrounded in a mist placed by both her culture and the Romans. But there's still enough there to tell a fantastic story. Veleda came from the Bructeri, a Germanic tribe who occupied territory roughly between the Ems and Lippe rivers in what is now the Westphalia region of northwestern Germany. The Bructeri were a significant tribal force in the early centuries AD, not a minor or peripheral group. They show up repeatedly in Roman accounts as troublemakers, from Rome's perspective, people who consistently resisted Roman expansion east of the Rhine, because God forbid they don't want to be colonized,
God
troublemakers.
forbid.
So Veleda wasn't emerging from some obscure backwater, though. The Bructeri had actually been involved in one of Rome's most humiliating defeats. They were militarily relevant in the broader Germanic world, among the coalition of tribes that participated in the Battle of Teutoburg Forest in 9 AD. You remember the one from the first episode of this season? Where 3 entire Roman legions under Publius, God, he has the most Roman name ever, Publius Quinctilius Varus, they were annihilated by Germanic forces led by Arminius. And when we say annihilated, that's putting it mildly.
I mean, I can just, every time we talk about it, all I can see is Octavius, give me back my legions, like throwing a little bitch fit in his palace. It's my favorite thing.
He's like, God, I don't know why I'm imagining him as like B. Arthur. It's just like he's got like the robe, and then he's like throwing himself down on a couch, like biting his fist. Give me back my legions. I don't know why it's the image, but there it is.
But I love the image, and honestly, probably accurate.
Also, he would hate it because I just compared him to a strong female lead. But anyway, so this was one of those tribes that helped decorate the Teutoburg Forest with their own invented version of Christmas ornaments, aka Roman heads and body parts. So, that catastrophe permanently ended Rome's ambitions to push its frontier to the Elbe River. So by the time Veleda came along, about 6 decades later, which, I mean, is a long time, but that would be the equivalent of like Vietnam today, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's still in our consciousness, right? Like, it comes up every time we have foreign wars. Like, I don't know, going to like Afghanistan or Iraq or Iran. It's why we get real nervous whenever, China war comes up. It's just like
Yeah.
we'd rather punch someone closer by, I guess. And that's what Rum thought too. Like, fuck all that. We'd rather punch the people nearby. So Veleda's coming along about 6 decades later, and her tribe had a long tradition of defying Rome, as we've seen, and that is the cultural backdrop important for understanding the world she grew up in. Speaking of Veleda, let's talk about her name. Um, this is one of the more intriguing scholarly debates surrounding her. The name Veleda almost certainly wasn't like her actual name, right? Like personal name, right? Before the show started, Courtney and I were talking about this. That would be like, imagine you're like the president of like wherever, right? The United States. We'll just use that as an example. And people who've never met you, like we'll just say aliens, right? Who don't speak your language, right? Don't understand. They know you're important, but they just keep hearing everyone call you president, Mr. President, President, right? Or Mrs. President, Madam President. You know, and they go, oh, that person's name is President.
Yeah.
That would be kind of what we're dealing with here, right? Like that was a title, more than likely, right? Or I mean, and that might not even be the most accurate way of describing it, but it wasn't like her personal name. We don't believe, right?
Yep.
Like she could have been like, I don't know, Cindy. Like that'd been cool.
God, please no.
I, I'm sorry to any Cindy's out there. It's not as intimidating, but neither's my name. Like, we were talking about this before the show too. Like, there's certain names, like, and I hate to admit it, like, like if you're gonna be a fascist leader, have a very blunt name, like a name that looks like it just hits, right? Like short, sweet. Brandon's not one of them.
Neither is Courtney. It's terrible.
Right, like
we're gonna have to change our name if we're gonna take over the world, Brandon. Dang.
Like Court might be good for you. Braun, like there was King Bronze out there. Yes, that's a hard name, but Brandon, it's nice. It literally translates to little crow / raven, so it literally means like little baby raven. Like it's not intimidating. And I hate to admit it, but a name, there's like certain like PR to names, right? Like, God forgive me, Trump. Okay, it's a great name if you're going to be a
fascist
leader right, or a leader who hits things, right? Blunt, shall we say?
Are we talking about brain power? Or are we talking about actual brawn?
No. Neither. He's pooping himself in diapers or something. I don't know. The point is, like, and that's why I get taken to the camps for this. But the point is, like, it's like there's certain names, and Cindy wouldn't be it. We've gone on a little rant. Sorry about that. So Veleda, probably not her actual name, but that's what she is being. That's all we know. So that's what we're calling her, right? The leading interpretation is that it derives actually from a Proto-Celtic or Proto-Germanic root, right? Mm-hmm. Scholars point to a Celtic word. Help me out here with this, Courtney, because girl, I can't. I'm still just getting hold of Fedra Nova. Okay,
you're doing fantastic. You're doing great, sweetie. No, but
it's weird because like I can't pronounce things really well. It just like I don't know why. Some of these I'm just like nope.
No, it's all good. And honestly, I was looking at this earlier because Celtic does not have a V sound. It has the V in the letters, but it's not a V. It's more of like a U sound. So like Woolley or Willette. That's really what we're looking at.
So it would have been like less like Veleda, right? Mm-hmm. Which I feel like it's funny because like in German they use V's all the time. Like anything with it's Volkswagen, it's not Volkswagen, it's so if you're saying it from a German standpoint, Veleda might be it, but like if it's Celtic, it would have been more like Uleda or wait, Veleda or something like that. I don't
Yeah.
know. I'm not Celtic. Fun facts about me. I'm a 6'2" ginger, and everyone goes, "Oh my god, I can tell you're Irish." Did the genealogy, babes? I'm sorry. I guess I'm British. We were the colonizers.
I'm sorry, so am
I'm
I.
sorry. Like I have a very complicated family tree, but no, I am not Irish. Um, yeah. But that being said, um, that's not my strong suit. It's not something I have a lot of practice with. But the point of this is that, however you say it, right? Both of these words have a meaning, and it's to see, right? Makes
Mhm.
sense. She's a seeress, to see. So this would make Veleda essentially a functional title, meaning seeress, or the one who sees.
Ta-da!
So they're just calling her seeress, and no one knows that. Rather than the birth name. That's why I said like the president, right?
Mhm.
Um, this has led some researchers to wonder whether there might have been multiple women called Veleda across different generations or tribes. But right?
Mhm.
Essentially, whether it was an office or a role that women could occupy, with the title passing on from one practitioner to the next, right? We can't confirm this because records are scarce. As we've discussed before, they didn't really have writing. That wouldn't come until much later. And then even then, that writing was limited, and then they eventually adopted like Latin
Yeah.
scripts. So we're hundreds of years before they even start to develop some kind of language that we're aware of, like that's written down. And even that language is kind of a mystery. So we don't know. We're going off vibes, and the Romans aren't capturing multiple ladies with this name apparently. So we don't 100% know, right? And
Mhm.
this is one tribe in a very large region. Um, so But it's a compelling idea, right? Because it would explain why the concept of Veleda seemed so immediately legible and meaningful to other Germanic peoples who encountered her. They they just heard her name and were like, "Oh, this bitch, okay." Because it wasn't her name. They're like, "This is the Veleda."
Yeah.
Oh, right. Um, they may have already been familiar with the type of person she was because that type had existed before her. Um, it's also worth noting that Tacitus, our guy who's writing almost all of this, right,
Mhm.
is writing in Latin for a Roman audience. And we keep saying this,
Correct.
right? Unfortunately, that's who we have to work with here. And he may have been rendering a Germanic or Celtic word imperfectly. Like again, because God, you really think that the colonizers are going to worry too much about making sure that's right? We have the same problem with like Boudica.
Mhm.
Um, the only reason we don't have this problem with like Zenobia or like Cleopatra is because we do know that that's like legit their name, and why it's their name and how it gets passed down and everything else is because the Greeks were writing shit down. Even though they were colonized, they were also culturally colonizing the other direction. And then same kind of thing with Zenobia. Like this is a culture that had existed for a very, very long time, had their own writing, were in many ways way more sophisticated than the Romans were. So there you go. Um, but like that's the problem if you don't have a writing system is that unfortunately if something like this happens, they're the ones writing your story,
Yeah.
and they're not going to worry
Exactly.
too much.
Exactly. So Veleda didn't appear out of nowhere. She stepped into a well established cultural and religious tradition amongst the Germanic peoples, the veneration of wise or prophetic women. Tacitus himself acknowledges this in his Germania, where he writes that the Germanic peoples believed something sacred and prescient resided in women, and they didn't dismiss female counsel or ignore female prophecy. He specifically mentions another seeress named Arinia, sometimes rendered as Albruna, who predated Veleda, suggesting that this was indeed a recurring phenomenon rather than a one off. These women occupied a unique social and spiritual space. They weren't quite priests in the Roman religious sense, but they weren't queens or chieftains. But they wielded a form of authority that could rival or even exceed those roles in certain contexts. This tradition likely has deep roots in the religious worldview of Germanic and broader Indo European cultures, where divination, prophecy, and communication with the divine were serious business that shaped political and military decisions. When a tribal leader was deciding whether to go to war, the word of a respected CRS could be the deciding factor. That gave women like Veleda extraordinary leverage in a society that was otherwise largely organized around male warrior culture. To actually have a voice in that kind of culture,
Uh,
it
w-
just.
right. Which is, we talked about this, like, not not common. Again, like, yes, we've seen strong female leaders or cultures that did allow women to have some sort of like voice, right? But not like
Mhm.
this, where it's organized. Like, this is your actual role that you should be filling, and it also allows you to speak and go walk around and whatever.
Mhm.
Even when you aren't a Veleda, a CRS, whatever, right? You are in charge of the domain of your home,
You're kind of
of
tied
the
to your hearth.
right. You're in charge of that inner world.
Mhm.
Right. So it's like we talked about that last week on last week's topic, right?
Mhm.
So something else that was interesting is that there's kind of like this like checks and balance system
Mhm.
here where you almost have like two different kinds of governance, right? You have like the king, chieftain, the thing, right? All that, which could be almost like an assembly of some sorts, right? I don't want to say like democracy or anything, but like, depends on how small the tribe is. But
Yeah.
like it's definitely like secular in that way, you know. And then you have like this other side with your CRS
Mhm.
Veleda, who's almost like this theocratic side, right?
Yeah.
So you almost have like a theocracy there too, and you have to have kind of like both agreeing
And that
to do.
honestly, that makes sense. Because even like if we are looking at the society, you have the outside because the outside is the male's domain, right?
Mhm.
The outside is the male's domain. And they are in charge of protecting the interior because they are outside. That is their domain. Women's domain is the inside. Women make everything run. Having the CRS being the traveling between the two, she is able to see, okay, what's going on both sides of this, to be able
Mhm.
to almost mediate between the interior and the exterior.
Oh, well, her body's sacred. You can't like fuck
Exactly.
her up. Like not like Vestal Virgin sacred, but like no, she is that sacred in between, like you're saying. Like she's not necessarily tied down to one tribe, right? Like that
Mm-hmm.
might be her OG tribe, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like she's the mediator. And if we're looking internally, right? Like so the king can declare war, well, chief, king, whatever, right? He can declare the war, he can demand the warriors to show up, right? She can't necessarily go like, hey guys, let's go start a war right now. I demand soldiers, right? She does rely on the chieftain for that. However, the chieftain relies on her for approval.
Exactly.
Or if she suggests it and he ignores her and it turns to shit, right? It won't look good on him, right? So like it's not direct power in that sense, but like they need each other,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Absolutely.
Um and like yeah, also she's independent a bit from that. Like it's not like she doesn't usually go around declaring war. If she is like suggesting it, it sounds like shit's really hitting the fan. You should probably listen to her. Because she's been traveling around, she's seen some shit.
Exactly.
Um
She has the exterior perspective and the interior perspective. She's just like, y'all gonna get fucked.
However, if you want to be successful in battle, right? Like you've decided, I want to go to war with X tribe, right?
Mm-hmm.
You need her to be approving of it. Like, yes, the gods have approved of this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in order to be successful, if she goes, I don't think this is a good idea, and you go and do it, people might not follow you.
Correct.
And if you think that they do, and it does go to shit,
That's on
There's a kind
you.
of so right, and like
Yep.
that you could get killed for that.
Yep.
So yeah, it's interesting. Women have not had
Mhm.
this role, official role so far.
Yeah. So this is very special. And unfortunately, here is where we run into the limits of our sources frustratingly fast. We genuinely don't know much about Veleda's life before she became a prominent figure during the Batavian Revolt. Was she born into a family of religious specialists? Was she identified early as having prophetic gifts or trained in some way? Did she come from a noble or priestly lineage among the Bructeri, or was she more of an ordinary woman whose apparent gifts elevated her? Tacitus simply doesn't tell us, and no other sources fill the gap. What we can reasonably infer is that achieving the level of authority and renown Veleda had by the time of the revolt, to the point where even neighboring tribes and the Romans themselves took her seriously, probably didn't happen overnight. She must have built a reputation over time. Through prophecies that were seen to come true, through the force of her personality, through the trust of the Bructeri leadership, or most likely through some combination of all of these. The dramatic setup of living in a tower on the Lippe River and receiving visitors only through intermediaries suggests a carefully cultivated mystique. And cultivating that kind of mystique takes time and social capital. It's also worth thinking about what prophecy actually means in this context, because it wasn't quite the same as the modern image of someone gazing into a crystal ball. Germanic religious practice in this period involved things like reading natural omens. So we're reading the clouds, we're looking at the birds, we're looking at the behavior of sacred horses, we're casting lots, we're throwing bones, we are reading runes. Like there is a lot that is happening here.
Right.
Um
And even like when you were talking about like the looking at the clouds part, right? It's not like
mhm.
looking up like, oh, that one looks like a. I mean, and maybe some of that, but like I like to think it's probably more like there's something about those clouds. I know that storms are coming, right? Like
Yeah.
because that shape, right? You see that a lot too. Like there's times where they go and warn like they're warnings for tornadoes, and if you were like someone who doesn't regularly live in Tornado Alley, you go like, why? That just looks like a pretty big cloud, like a pretty fluffy big cloud. And it's like, no,
No,
that's a secret.
that is a terrifying omen. Get into a
Like
basement or a very low area.
when the sky turns green,
Oh, yeah,
right?
no. See, I'm from Texas. If the sky turns green, I am not leaving my bunker.
And then like again, it's kind of an old wives' tale, but there is some truth to it. Like like red sky in the morning, sailor take warning, right? Like
Mhm.
and there is some science to it because it's like yes, because if those clouds are there, right, they're going to reflect and refract that color, that
Yep.
spectrum of color. So if you wake up one morning, and I'm not talking, or like when we woke up in upstate New York and all those wildfires happened a few years ago, and we woke up and it looked like Mars. That's usually not a good sign.
Right.
But like when you wake up and you see that scarlet pinky sky, pretty, but that looks like something that should be on a sunset.
Yep.
Yep, that's probably
It's
probably a storm that day. And so like
mhm.
we understand that now, but back then they're like, wow, she was able to tell, right? And
No, and a lot of
if you're getting
divination realistically, if we are looking at it, because hi, I do this. A lot of divination is patterns. You're
Mhm.
noticing patterns. You are um like I've actually looked into cloud divination. I cannot think of the name of it right off the top of my head, but it's more of okay, what direction are the clouds traveling? What is going on with them? Where is the wind coming from? Yes, it can kind of come in sort of shapes, but it's not necessarily like, oh, there's the fluffy bunny. Like that's not what we're looking at.
I mean, and I don't know, maybe there is some of that like, oh, I see this shape in the clouds. I don't know, like tea leaves, but to me that seems like a more modern invention. Like when you see it in like Harry Potter and she's like, the grim and it's a dog in the bottom of your cup and you're like, okay. But like that doesn't seem, I mean, maybe it was. But like it could also just be like, oh, that is a cloud like a rabbit. as in meaning texture and color, and you've given it that animal identity, kind of like constellations,
Yes.
right? Like, and you're like, okay, I know that means that today should be fine, but if that cloud looks like a mountain, or that's a mountain that moves, maybe
Yeah.
not good.
Maybe not
Maybe we need,
good.
maybe we are about to have a nasty flood, and we need, maybe right now is not a good time to plant certain things, you know.
Correct.
Right. Um, Today that's called meteorology, but like the fact that people are just doing it with their senses, right? When they're like, "Oh, this is the wrong time of year for that,"
Mm-hmm.
that would have seemed prophetic. Um,
Absolutely. And it is in a way because you are able
yeah,
to gather all of the evidence that you can see, put the patterns together, and be like, that's going to fuck us up.
yeah,
It
yeah,
is.
yeah, and that's
So,
why her role is important, right?
absolutely.
It's not just, ooh, she's just a witch bitch. Like she is actually doing something for her community,
Very much
you
so.
know. So
A seeress like Veleda would likely have been a practitioner of one or more of these techniques, someone who was seen as having a special channel to the gods or to fate itself. The Germanic concept of fate, what would later be elaborated in Norse tradition as concepts like weird, and the Norns, was deeply serious. Fate wasn't something you could change, but knowing it in advance was immensely valuable because it let you align your actions with what was destined. A seeress, who could peer into fate and relay what she found, was thereby performing an almost cosmically important function. She wasn't just a spiritual celebrity, she was a practical asset to any military or political endeavor. This is why Veleda's early and apparently accurate predictions of Roman defeats during the Batavian Revolt were so electrifying. They weren't just morale boosters, they were seen as confirmation that the gods and fate itself were on the Germanic side. And that is an incredibly powerful thing to be the source of. So when you put it all together, Veleda's origins sit at the intersection of a specific tribal context, the defiant, Rome resistant Bructeri, a long standing religious tradition of female prophecy in Germanic culture, and an almost certainly deliberate construction of sacred authority. She was both a product of her world and, by all accounts, a genuinely remarkable individual.
before we get into the revolt itself, and some of this is filler, right? Like, because we don't know like her childhood and what she was up to, right? But it is also just important to understand like where this revolt came from, right? And it didn't also again come from a vacuum. So let, I think it's time we ask ourselves who were the Batavians, right? Um, so before getting into the revolt itself, it helps to understand who these Batavians were because their particular relationship with Rome is really the engine that drives everything that follows. The Batavians, or Batavi, were a Germanic people who inhabited the Insula Batavorum, the island of the Batavians, a region formed by the splitting of the Rhine into two channels in what is now Netherlands. It was strategically significant piece of real estate sitting right on Roman's northern frontier. So the Batavi had a special relationship with Rome that was genuinely unusual amongst Germanic peoples. They weren't a conquered people in the traditional sense. They were formerly allied with Rome as Foderati tribe, meaning that they had a treaty relationship rather than being subjects of direct Roman rule.
Mhm.
As part of this arrangement, right, they were exempt from regular taxation, which was a significant concession, right? Like Rome loved their taxes, girl. Like all colonizers do. They love taxing the shit out of people, right? Especially
Mhm.
when you have a government like Rome, which is like giving people like free food and stuff like that. Um, that's why they tax their provinces so much, right? Um, because they don't want to deal. The closer you get to Rome itself, the more privileges typically you have, right? Like Rome is going to like people of Rome are going to have probably more privilege, like the most amount of privileges, right? Versus like Italy, and then Italy, like the part of Italy that would have not like the whole boot, but like the immediate areas around Italy and like Sicily would have had more privileges than say like the areas outside of that region and like in like rings,
Hmm.
right? So this tribe is like on the furthest edge of the ring. So it is surprising that they're getting this kind of privilege.
Yeah.
That's usually reserved for like citizens in Rome. Um, so what Rome got in return, though, right? Because there's got to be a catch. Come on, they aren't doing this out of the kindness of their hearts. Um, in return was something it valued enormously: soldiers, right? But Rome has soldiers, right? I mean, like that's kind of their whole thing, right? Legions and like, but the Batavians were considered the among the finest warriors in the ancient world, the Roman military world in particular. They were particularly celebrated for their ability to cross rivers, so swim, fully armored.
Oh,
That's impressive,
that is
right? It doesn't
highly
sound,
impressive.
but like, do you know how many times armies had to stop, especially right up until modern times, but like in ancient times and in Rome, like someone would have to stop because they burnt the bridge, so they have to build a bridge to get across and everything. And it slows everyone way the hell down, and you are a sitting duck while they are there. And if it's not your territory, you end up with a Teutonberg situation, you know?
Yeah.
Because like they're just shooting at you as you're trying to build a fucking bridge to get to them, right? So to have these people who can just ford the thing
Hmm.
and not just ford it, like they're brilliant cavalry people, right? Maybe ponies. These might be our pony folk. Fun facts. We talked about this a couple episodes.
Uh-huh.
Um, yeah, but they may have been riding ponies, but still, they were cavalry swimming alongside their horses.
That's nuts.
So they're known for these crazy, like they're great horsemen, right? These are the people that Caesar was using
Hmm.
during when we talked about Mark Antony and that big battle there.
Hmm.
Um, so in Alessia, yeah. So that's those were the horse bros. Um, they also were even like outside of like the cavalry and all that, which was impressive on its own, right?
Hmm.
When the infantry were crossing these rivers, right, they were in formation, like they didn't break, like
Oh my
that's
God.
yeah, like these were like the Navy SEALs of like the Black Ops of, well, maybe not Black Ops, definitely Navy SEALs though, of but bigger. Like I feel like Navy SEALs does like Black Ops. If I don't know, I'm not military. The point is like they're able to do this kind of like crazy crap, right? Um, and they were extraordinary fighters, and Rome knew it, right?
Hmm.
Um, I'm sure Rome could have probably wiped them out at some point if they had really wanted to, but it's like, why do that? Why do that?
We can use them.
Use them. Correct. Um, So the Batavian units served all across the empire, because that's how you kind of keep them from rising up, right? From Britain to the Middle East, which I feel like the ones in Britain. At first, you'd think, "Oh man, they gotta be miserable. It's gotta be all cold and rainy." I'm like, "Yeah," but as a ginger, like as much as I would love to be in the Middle East, that sounds beautiful, right? That sun, bro. I don't know. It's so far from home and everything familiar. You know,
That
there's no
makes
shore leave from there. It's not like you take a plane home. So that feels like unfortunate if you got stationed all the way over there. But anyway, they formed like an elite auxiliary cohort. So auxiliary in the Roman sense are pretty much anyone who's not a Roman legion, like a Roman, right?
hmm.
So special operations groups, like special people. So you might have like Thracians, you might have like there's some horse bros from like North Africa, Mauritania area. You've got like these guys, of course, Batavi. You have like the lady like
Hmm.
warriors from like the steppes. right? So like they are not normally hiring Roman women to fight their battles. So, but yet we have evidence that there were female warriors in the Roman armies. So those are your auxiliaries, right? Um, and the Batavi in particular served as personal bodyguards to the emperor, right? So you have the Praetorian Guard, yes, but then there's the Batavi on top of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but right, the Praetorian Guard is still kind of in its infancy here. Okay, they're not the kind of people quite yet. Like who do all the stabby stab and decide, oh, I don't like this emperor, let's get ourselves a new one. They don't have that quite that power yet because of these Batavi, who are more personal to the emperor than they are, I guess. So they're not as politically motivated up until this point.
Mm-hmm.
Um, However, the Germanic Corpus Custodes, a unit that lasted until Galba, disbanded it after Nero's death, right? So, the Batavians weren't strangers to Rome or Roman military culture. Many of their leading men were deeply embedded into Roman structures. This makes the revolt all that more striking, because it wasn't a people who had never known Rome rising up in ignorance. I hate to say it, like Boudica,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like Boudica's people rose up too. They did a lot of damage, but that never made it outside, right? These were people who knew Rome intimately from the inside, who had decided they had had enough. The revolt was almost unthinkable without understanding its leader, Gaius Julius Civilis. That's right, he has a big old Roman name, and he's the leader of these people. So he's a fascinating character in his own right. Maybe tell a story one day. But his very name tells you something important. The Gaius Julius part is a Roman name. The kind of name a Romanized provincial would take, often derived from the family of whoever granted them citizenship. Julius.
Julius, fucking Caesar.
Yeah, the Julian Claudians of it all. Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So this is someone who is at least almost at a familial level with these people, right? You don't get that unless you've really gotten in there. So Civilis was a Batavian nobleman who had served in the Roman auxiliary forces for decades. He was deeply familiar with Roman military tactics, organization, and psychology. He spoke Latin. He had spent a bunch of his adult life operating within the Roman structure of it all, right?
Mm-hmm.
He also had serious personal grievances against Rome. At some point before the revolt, he and his brother Paulus had been accused of treason.
Oh.
The specific charge isn't entirely clear from the sources, but it was serious enough that Paulus was executed.
Oh.
Yeah, and Civilis was sent to Rome in chains to be tried before Nero, which might give you an indication of what's really going on here. I would say less treason and more like, yo, kid, you're fucking this shit up, and he didn't take too kindly to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's giving current administration.
A little
You know,
bit.
it's giving that, right?
Yeah.
At least we're not executing people yet. We're just firing them.
Oh, no. Well, we can't say that because we don't know what's going on in black zones.
That's
But
true. But just as murky, just as shady. Um, so Civilis was ultimately acquitted or released, but the experience left him we'll say justifiable bitterness, right? Like
indeed,
it's a little salty.
indeed. Oh, I would be all of the salt. I would be a pillar of salt.
But Nero was messy, right? And he did But
Mhm.
when Galba became emperor after Nero's death in 68 AD, Civilis was again put in danger. The Batavian troops loyal to him were accused of disloyalty. And again, this is a whole rabbit hole, right? After Nero died, it's a shit show. Okay. But we're not getting into all that, right? It's like the year of 5 emperor, all this crazy shit. All the like at this point, the last quote unquote, like when you've set up an autocracy that has a it's like there's no kings, but there's kings, right?
Yeah.
When there's no more heirs anymore, anyone
Yeah.
can be emperor, but also no one, right? Because no one has that. Everyone has the same level of authority, and everyone's going to argue that they have more authority. And then when they kill the person, they're like, "Well, I had the authority to kill that person because I have more authority." It's a vicious cycle, right?
Yep.
And it's going to go on for a hot minute. But Galba, for whatever reason, doesn't trust the Batavi. And this is where we're going to start seeing the elevation of the Praetorian Guard. Okay. But that's a different story. The point was that he accused them of disloyalty, and there were fears he might be executed. Okay. Civilis, not Galba. I know. It gets confusing because everyone's very stabby. But
Super. Well, that's the Rome of it all, honestly.
I mean, it's the ancient world of it all, but yeah, definitely the Rome of it. By this point, definitely the Rome of it all. I mean, Nero did not help any of this. You know, he was real stabby by this point. I mean,
Well,
this
he
is the
was
one where,
dead by this point.
well,
But
he's dead by this point, but he killed his mom, his half brother. Like, yeah, he did a lot. He had a lot of issues. But Civilis survived. But the message was clear. His position was precarious as long as he remained within the Roman structures, which has got to be rough, right? You
yeah.
grew up with the system, and you were told and brought up to believe that if you uphold the republic, I mean, Rome, yeah, like if you vote, I mean, if you do your duty.
Ooh.
Anyway, it's not exact parallels, but it just goes to it's a good example of like you can grow up in a structure being raised to believe that is the right way, but that thing can change, and then you don't know what to do.
Yep.
Right? Because what you were raised to believe and act no longer applies. So Civilis was someone who combined their insider knowledge of Rome's military machine with deep personal reasons to want to see that machine humbled, right? And it's interesting when you think of it that way, right? It's not like the rebellion isn't so much to overthrow Rome and destroy Rome, so much as make them understand.
Yeah.
Right? Like fighting an oppressive regime, corruption, things going wrong, and being like, look, you're not honoring your contracts. Someone needs to stand up and do the right thing. Honor the agreements, uphold the status quo that has always existed and worked fine. Not realizing that that's already gone. When everything's an honor system, but they're going to paint these as traitors, which actually, in my opinion, is showing loyalty. They're loyal to Rome, the idea of Rome, the idea of America. I mean Rome, but they're going to be painted as anti-American. I mean Roman. Man, I just keep getting so mixed up. So that being said, this is a dangerous combination, and the chaos of 69 AD. Good year for this. Everyone's
year
just
for this.
down. Everything's topsy-turvy. Up is down.
Down is up. Top is bottom.
You love it. So we give 5. We give nothing but the best quality here. So
I've never
please
received complaints, but
put us on in every kindergarten class. Every child should hear our story. No, please don't.
Never. Oh my god.
Don't. You have to explain so much to them. Anyway, this the chaos of it all, right, gave Civilis exactly the opportunity he needed.
So, unfortunately, we genuinely cannot understand the Batavian Revolt without understanding what was happening inside of Rome in 68 and 69 AD, because the revolt was in many ways born from Rome's internal collapse. When,
Hmm.
I mean, power
Hmm.
vacuums. When Nero
That's
died,
familiar.
I
Sounds
know,
familiar.
I know.
Are you telling me that when there's a state of entropy and like the internal structures that have upheld an entire government have slowly been whittled away, and now they're just straight up knocking the last remaining bricks, that's hard that the whole thing might come collapsing down, and that
Yeah.
I don't know, you might have authoritarian regimes that displace people and all that?
Quite possibly, yes.
I
Hmm.
know.
Interesting. Good to know. When Nero died in June of 68 AD, he left no heir and no clear succession. What followed was one of the most destabilizing years in Roman history. Within roughly 12 months, so 1 year, four different men claimed the title of emperor. You got Galba, Ortho, Vitellius, and finally Vespasian. Each of these successions involved military force. Legions stationed in different parts of the empire backed different claimants, and Roman armies were fighting each other rather than external enemies. The Rhine frontier legions, in particular, were deeply involved in this chaos. They had backed Vitellius, a general popular with the German frontier troops and played a significant role in his rise to power. When Vespasian finally and ultimately emerged as the victor, and Vitellius was killed in December of 69 AD, the Rhine legions found themselves on the losing side of a civil war, with their loyalty newly suspect. Their commanders were discredited. For Civilis and the Batavians, the situation was an almost unimaginable opportunity. Rome was distracted, divided, and militarily stretched. The legions that would normally enforce Roman authority on the Rhine frontier were either depleted from civil war fighting, politically compromised, or simply demoralized. The usual overwhelming force that made revolt suicidal was temporarily unavailable. Civilis, with his soldier's eye for tactical openings, recognized this immediately. So, several specific provocations in the lead up to the revolt deserve attention because they show how Rome's mistreatment of the Batavians created the kindling that Civilis would ignite. The most significant was the issue of the levy. As Rome's civil wars ground on and manpower demands escalated, Roman commanders began pushing for more Batavian recruits, and doing so in ways that flagrantly violated the spirit of the treaty relationship. Instead of the honorable military service that the Batavians had traditionally provided, Roman recruiters were engaging in practices that were essentially abusive. Press ganging men who were too old or too young, accepting bribes from wealthier Batavians who wanted to exempt their sons while conscripting the poor, and in some cases, allegedly targeting good looking young men for sexual exploitation by Roman officers.
Oh, it.
Yeah.
Oh, babes. And you know, the thing is, it's like we don't have necessarily a direct correlate like something like today, like right now that's happening in our government, but like there's some, right? Like the
Oh, yeah.
idea that like how often have we talked? I mean, this was a thing I remember during like the Iraq war, right? It's like, oh, you have no problem doing this war, but you won't let your own son sign up for the military for the
Yep.
war you wanted, right?
Correct.
Mm. You saw this in the Civil War too. Like people would just pay for someone else to go so that their own kids didn't have to go.
Mm-hmm.
It pays to be rich. But then also, you know, the idea of just taking young, good-looking people and human trafficking them to an island where people can just, I mean, wherever, it's just you know, where powerful people can just abuse them.
It's so fucked up.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Um,
I mean, obviously, these were serious violations of the dignity and autonomy that the Batavians believed their treaty relationship had guaranteed them. There was also the broader issue of Roman arrogance towards the auxiliary troops in general. Auxiliary soldiers, so non citizen troops fighting for Rome, were treated as distinctly second class compared to the legionary soldiers who held Roman citizenship. They often faced I tried to suppress it. They often faced harsher discipline, worse pay, and less prestigious postings. For the Batavians, who had an exceptionally proud martial tradition and who served Rome faithfully for generations, this treatment was galling. They were among Rome's best soldiers and they knew it. Being treated as expendable provincials rather than honored allies was a constant source of resentment.
Yeah, because it's not like they're okay, so they're not Roman citizens, right?
Mhm.
Um, but they didn't want it because it's like we're our own country essentially,
Yep.
a client kingdom, if you will. But it's more a little more nuanced than that, but roughly, right? Like they're and now like that's why they're not taxed. Like, and now all of a sudden, all that doesn't matter,
Yeah.
and
It's
never had
it's
mattered.
gross. It's gross.
And it's like we're not your citizens, we're your allies. You're right, you're not our citizens. Now
Excuse me, you forgot the other part of that sentence.
get in the back of the wagon. Um, and also we'll be taking all of this. Thank you. Um,
Ugh.
we have let you be independent at our leisure, sir. We could have crushed you at any point, and we at our leisure let you exist. Again, tell me to stop when this sounds familiar.
That's so
Um,
gross.
it's colonialism, right?
Yeah.
So in 69 AD, while the civil war between Vitellius and Vespasian was still unresolved, Civilis made a characteristically clever opening move because he was no dummy. Um, he framed his initial mobilization not as a revolt against Rome, but as support for Vespasian against Vitellius. This was shrewd on multiple levels. It gave him political cover. It's kind of like what Caesar did.
Mm-hmm.
Like, no, 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 I'm not invading Rome. I'm getting rid of the guy who committed treason. Like, like I'm liberating you. Right?
Yeah.
And just for the record, like Vespasian's coming out of from the Middle East. Like, so it's interesting that he chose Vespasian over Vitellius. But you know. And so he wasn't rebelling against Rome. He was backing the right candidate in a Roman civil war. It made it harder for battalion commanders on the Rhine to respond aggressively without looking like they were defending a losing cause. It allowed him to recruit not just Batavians, but also Roman sympathizers and troops who were themselves disaffected by Vitellian's regime. He gathered his initial forces as Sacred Grove, and which I kind of like quote Sacred Grove because the Romans always said that these people were sacred groves, but maybe they were. Um, and if that's true, the choice of the location is telling. This
Mm-hmm.
wasn't going to be a military muster in the Roman style. That's why I'm a little side eyeing it though, because I'm like, how do you make these? Because everyone's writing after the fact. How do you make them seem more German?
Yeah.
But it could have been. But it was framed as a religious gathering, drawing on Germanic traditions, assembling under like a divine sanction. Again, the only big reason I question this is he was pretty much raised a Roman, so I do find that interesting that he would choose that, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Supposedly he gave a speech there that Tacitus reconstructs because that's what they always do, right? Like the speech, who even it doesn't, it probably wasn't even never happened, but it doesn't matter that it didn't happen. It's what it represents.
Yeah.
Um, supposedly invoked the grievances of his people, the insults they had suffered, and the opportunity presented by Rome's weakness. You'll see this with Boudica and all of them too. Um, it was partly a military briefing and partly a religious ceremony, and that combination was entirely deliberate. By framing the revolt in a sacred terms from the very beginning, Civilis may have been doing something important. He was giving it legitimacy that went beyond his own personal authority. The gods, and by extension, Veleda, were being woven into the enterprise from the start. And I know we were talking a lot about Civilis and Roman and dudes, right? But we are getting back to Veleda, I promise. Um, so the early stages of the revolt went remarkably well for Civilis, which itself accelerated the momentum and drew in more participants. Roman forces on the Rhine were in a weak and confused state, and Civilis exploited this ruthlessly. He won several early engagements against Roman auxiliary units, some of which were themselves Batavian. So again, right, doesn't mean all Batavians were on his side,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And in a striking development, many of those Batavian soldiers fighting on the Roman side defect. Not to me, not super surprising, but it's a good development for him. Defected to Civilis once the fighting had started, right? So they're like, why the fuck are we fighting them?
Oh, those are our people. Let's go.
Like, yeah, fucking Brutus over there keeps brutalizing my asshole every night. Why the fuck am I fighting for him? Keep that or put in the blooper reel. I don't know what to tell you. It's been said.
No, it just shocked the shit out of me. Oh my god. I was not prepared for that one.
What? At any rate, Brutus brutalizing my asshole. God, that was off the top of my head too. Anyway, but this was enormously significant, as you might imagine. It meant Civilis wasn't just defeating Roman forces; he was peeling away Rome's Batavian manpower and adding it to his own. The Romans suddenly found themselves fighting with fewer Batavian troops at exactly the moment they needed them most. No, not my booty call. Where are we going?
Oh no!
Did we do last night mean nothing to you? No.
Oh my god.
It's the year of 69. I thought you were on board. Anyway. All right. The Bructeri. Oh my god, we're children. Oh.
This is why we're friends.
It was the summer of 69.
Yeah,
Brutus
but it
put
was.
his in my eye.
Oh Lord.
In the eye hole. Anyway. There's an eye patch involved now. Anyway. How'd you get
That was an accident.
The Bructeri, Veleda's own tribe, have now joined the chat and have joined the revolt, as did several other Germanic peoples, such as the Tencteri, the Kugerni, and others. What had begun as the Batavian grievance was expanding to something that looked much more like a broad Germanic coalition. Tribes that had their own reasons to resent Roman power saw Civilis's gesture. And it was at this stage that Veleda's prophecies of Roman defeat became so electrifying. She was predicting victories that were actually happening, which made her seem not just credible, but divinely connected to the outcome. Roman camps were besieged, and in some cases captured. In the winter of 69 to 70 AD, saw Roman military authority in the Lower Rhine effectively collapse in certain areas. For a brief, extraordinary moment, it looked like the Germanic tribes might drive Rome back across the Rhine permanently.
One of the first things worth noting is that Veleda didn't insert herself into the revolt from the very beginning in a visible or documented way. Civilis launched his initial mobilization and won his earliest engagements before Veleda appears prominently in our sources. This is actually important because it suggests that her involvement escalated alongside the revolt itself. As the stakes grew higher and the coalition broader, the need for a unifying spiritual authority became more pressing. and Veleda stepped into that role at exactly the right moment. Think about what Civilis was trying to do in these early stages. He was bringing people together, multiple different tribes with different interests, different histories, and different relationships with Rome. The Batavians had their specific treaty grievances. The Bructeri had their own reasons for hostility towards Rome. The Tincteri, the Cogerni, and other groups joining the coalition each brought their own agendas and their own tribal pride. Holding that kind of coalition together through military authority alone is enormously difficult. Tribal leaders don't naturally subordinate themselves to someone from another tribe just because he's winning battles. You need something that transcends individual tribal loyalty, something that speaks to a shared identity or a shared divine mandate. Veleda provided exactly that. As the Bructeri seeress with a reputation that already extended beyond her own tribe, she could serve as a kind of neutral spiritual authority. Not Batavian, not any of the other specific tribes, but a voice that belonged to the Germanic world more broadly. Her involvement gave the revolt a sacred dimension that made it bigger than any single tribe's grievances. It's easy for modern readers to treat prophecy as window dressing, as the ancient equivalent of good PR. But this would be a serious misreading of how prophecy functioned in this cultural context. When Veleda endorsed the revolt and predicted Germanic victory, she wasn't just providing a morale boost in the way of a rousing speech. She was making a claim about the will of the gods and the structure of fate itself. And remember, fate. It's not just a vague force in the Germanic worldview. It was something that could be known, at least partially, by those with the gift to perceive it. A seeress who spoke of victory wasn't just expressing optimism. She was reporting what she had seen in the fabric of what was to come. If her vision was trusted, and Veleda's clearly was, then following the revolt wasn't just a military gamble, it was alignment with destiny. Refusing to join or fighting against the revolt, conversely, meant putting yourself on the wrong side of fate, which carried profound spiritual and practical risks in this worldview. This changes the calculus for every tribal leader weighing whether to join Civilis. It's not just, does this revolt have good odds of success? It becomes, do I want to be the person who stood against what the seeress said the gods intended? That is a much harder position to take, particularly in a culture where the consequences of divine disfavor were taken with complete seriousness.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like we said earlier, like that case in point right here. Do you want to be known as that king when the Theorist did say, hey, maybe you should get on board with this bandwagon and you didn't?
Yeah, let's not.
Or if she said, maybe we don't, and you did, and you fucked up? Right.
Yeah.
So by the time Veleda was at the height of her involvement with the revolt, she was living in a tall tower on the Leap River in the Bructeri territory. Tacitus mentions this detail almost in passing, because of course he did, but it's worth unpacking because it tells us a great deal about how her authority was constructed and maintained. And we kind of know this a little bit from the CRS episode, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, the tower served multiple purposes simultaneously. On a purely practical level, of course, it gave her a defensible, controlled location, a place where access to her could only be carefully managed. But the symbolic dimensions are at least as important as the practical ones, right? It's that height in the ancient world that carried strong associations with closeness to the divine. The gods lived above, and those who communicated with them were literally elevated above ordinary human society. Veleda's tower physically expressed her position between the human and divine realms. So again, another liminal space, a place only she can go, right?
Mm-hmm.
Unique to her, right? Also, again, the symbolism of that, like only certain people can get up there, one at a time, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a symbology with that too, not just practical. Um, The management of access was particularly significant, right? Speaking of visitors, whether tribal leaders seeking guidance, ambassadors from other peoples, or even eventually Romans attempting to negotiate, were not permitted to see Veleda directly. Instead, a relative of hers, described by Tacitus as acting as an intermediary, would carry questions up to her and bring her responses back down. That's kind of a power move. I love that. Like it's like wait here, and they have to just wait. That's I love that.
It's big bitch energy, and I love it.
Yeah, yeah, it's big clit energy, as the Queen's podcast would say. It's like
Yes.
I love that. Man, that had and it's that silence. Imagine them, they're just waiting, kicking the ground a little. I love it. So it prevented. All right, sorry. This arrangement did several things at once. It prevented Veleda from being seen in ordinary human context, which would have been, which would have inevitably humanized her, right, and therefore dismissed her mystique. It created a ritual structure around every consultation, which reinforced the sense that accessing her wisdom was part of a sacred act rather than a simple conversation. I mean, this is what what Louis like the 14th did with Versailles, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
right, the pageantry. It's like it makes you like it's a tale as old as time, right? She's not doing anything unique. It's what Octavian did when he was Augustus, eventually, right? So it also gave her an additional layer of protection. No one could physically threaten or pressure her directly, right? Like no men grabbing her wrist or slamming things on tables or anything or pointing swords at her, right? No, no. Um, this was a sophisticated image management, and whether it was entirely Veleda's own design or honestly, in my probably more likely to me, emerged through tradition and practical necessity, it worked, right? Like to me, it makes sense that this is kind of just like the established thing. Also, kind of gives credence, right? Like with the idea of her relative being this intermediary, right? That this was maybe a familial role, right?
Yeah.
And like this is like if she's doing like this prophesying thing, right? Like being in the tower, being able to look at the clouds, having a view over your land, and seeing those signs. I mean, again, if we're using meteorology as like kind of
The
like the
example.
equivalent here, yeah, like it'd be like your weather stations and towers, right? Like, I mean, it makes sense. Um, Even outside of just being a defensible position and knowing when, but also that idea of you can see when people are coming way far out, right? And then like that also adds to your mystique of like, whoa, man, she was ready for us. It's almost like she knew we were coming, you know? I mean, is she right? So it makes sense that that had been the case, that this wasn't just a her thing, like that would just be important as her job. So,
Yeah.
um, this intermediary structure made her simultaneously more authoritative, as it would, and more mysterious, which fed directly into the effectiveness of her as a unifying spiritual force for this revolt. The specific content of the latest prophecies is, of course, not preserved in detail, right? No one's writing it word for word, and if they were, they would have been Roman.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking
And
of,
we wouldn't trust it anyway.
right? Speaking of, Tacitus pipes in, has come back into the chat, and he gives us the outcomes and their effects rather than the actual words of her prediction. Um, Especially since her words carried so much power, not a surprise. Probably too afraid to write that down word for word in case
Yeah.
they still had power. But what we can piece together from his account is that she predicted Roman military defeats at specific points during the revolution, and those defeats then actually happened. This is the core of how her reputation was built during this period. The psychological effect of this cannot be overstated. every time a Roman force was beaten, every time a Roman camp fell, or a Roman commander was humiliated, it wasn't just a military victory, it was a confirmation of Veleda's visions. The warriors who had fought that battle had done so with the knowledge that she had foreseen their victory, and now here it was. That creates a
Mm-hmm.
powerful feedback loop. Her prophecies encouraged bold action. Bold action produced victories, and victories validated the prophecies, which encouraged further bold action. It's momentum, right?
Oh yeah.
It's momentum. It's like sports, any of that stuff, right? Nothing kills momentum like an early defeat, right? Or a losing streak, like yips, right? You can, but if you are winning a bunch, you can get over maybe a couple setbacks, and most of the time turn the tide. That's what Caesar was really good at, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
Even when shit was hitting the fan, turning it into a victory, so that way because he understood that. If you let it be a defeat, it's not good. Um, but if you can even turn the smallest things into a victory, um, it can completely change everything.
Mm-hmm.
So, she was, in a very real sense, a force multiplier for the revolt's military effectiveness. There was also something interesting happening within the Roman psychology here. The Romans, of course, are not dismissive of prophecy either. Their own, it's not like today we have this funny thing about religion, right? Like either ours is the right one and yours is the wrong one, as in ours is real, but yours isn't.
Yes.
Rome didn't think that way. They may think that in some cases theirs was superior, but they didn't think yours was not there.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're losing to your gods, that's not good, right? Because they believe that your gods are also real. So just keep that in your mind. Their own religious tradition was full of augury, oracles, and divination. They took signs and portents very seriously. It's apparently why when Caesar didn't take his very seriously, he got stabby stabbed.
Yeah.
To be fair, some like babes, I don't think it's a good idea to go out there. Some of them, I'm like, I don't think it was prophecy so much as reading the room. But hey, he had his sexy kinky boots, and he wasn't going to let anyone stop him from showing those off. Um,
No.
so, so when Roman soldiers and commanders learned that Germanic seeress had predicted their defeat time and time again, that knowledge had the potential to be genuinely demoralizing. You're fighting not just against human enemies, but also against what might be a divinely ordained outcome. As in, even if you don't think their gods are better, that your gods have abandoned you.
Yes.
Right? So that good. That's a difficult thing to maintain confidence in against, right? Particularly when the early military results seem to be proving her right.
So, one of the most striking specific episodes involving Veleda during the early revolt is the story of the Roman naval vessel. During the fighting along the Rhine, the Germanic forces managed to capture a Roman flagship, a trireme commanded by a Roman commander named Munius Lupercus. This was an extraordinary prize, both militarily and symbolically. A Roman
I just want to
flagship.
say, Munius Lupercus sounds like a fucking Harry Potter fake made up name.
It
Just saying.
sounds like a Harry Potter made up name, and he's a fucking werewolf in my mind.
Yeah, he's either a werewolf or
He's a fucking werewolf.
some shit. Like it's like moon, or it's like a spell, like Munius Lupercus.
And you're just gonna sick a wolf on somebody. It's gonna be an astral wolf that's just coming on.
Or like you just grow like wolf hair and you become like Wolfman. Not like
Yes.
werewolf, like it's like a prank joke curse, like where you just become really hairy. I don't. It's either way. It sounds silly. This is also to me maybe someone who doesn't have like a good like fascist emperor name. Like maybe like
Yeah.
if his name was like Moon, that would have been cool. But it's Munius Lupercus. It's not. I don't know.
I don't
I
know.
don't know.
Moonius gives us moon energy. Like
It's like Moon. That's his name now, guys. Commander Moon.
Commander Moon. But the flagship was an extraordinary prize, both militarily and symbolically. A Roman flagship represented imperial power and naval dominance on the Rhine frontier. The decision of what to do with the prize is revealing. Rather than keeping it as a straightforward military trophy or distributing the spoils amongst the victorious warriors in the conventional way, the leaders of the revolt sent the vessel to Veleda as a gift. Tacitus records this detail, and it's one of the most concrete illustrations we have of her actual status within the revolt. Think about what this gesture communicates. The most prestigious trophy of the early revolt wasn't kept by Civilis, the military commander. It wasn't dedicated to a specific tribal war leader. It was sent to Veleda. This tells us that the warriors and leaders involved in the revolt understood her as deserving the highest honor. As someone
Oh, it
who's.
gives Freya energy, though.
I
Think
know.
about that's. That blew my mind just now. Oh, I'm like, it's like Freya. She gets the first claim of the warriors, man.
Yes, she
Like,
does. Yes, the fuck she does.
yeah, so she gets first pick of the spoils. I love this
I love
detail
this so much.
now because like Freya doesn't really exist in like Freya, strictly speaking, okay,
Mm-hmm.
exists in the Norse pantheon, which comes much later. Descendants of the Germanic people.
Mm-hmm.
However, like we don't actually 100% know what these at this time what these German gods' names were or what they were all about, right? But it shows right here that there was a tradition of this shit.
Mm-hmm.
There's
There
your
we go.
connection. So
Absolutely.
yeah, I love that. I love that.
Absolutely. This tells us that the warriors and leaders involved in the revolt understood her as deserving of the highest honor, as someone whose contribution to the effort was at least equal to, and perhaps greater than, that of the military commanders. She was being recognized not as a peripheral spiritual advisor, but as a central figure in the enterprise, someone to whom tribute was owed. It also tells us something about how the revolt understood itself. Sending the flagship to the Ceres was a religious act. It was an offering of the fruits of victory to the divine power that had made victory possible. Veleda was being treated not just as a wise woman whose counsel was valued, but as something closer to a living conduit to the divine, someone through whom the gods' favor had been channeled.
Beyond the purely spiritual and symbolic dimensions, Veleda also played a concrete political and diplomatic role during this period that is sometimes underappreciated. I mean, shock, surprise, surprise.
Surprise, surprise!
Are you telling me that a woman is not being acknowledged for contributions in a typically male dominated space? Crazy. Anyway,
Insane.
insane. And that the male dominated society that did end up winning didn't want to admit that
Mm.
because it might undermine their own authority and belief systems.
Hmm.
No, never. Anyway, Tacitus, who we can always trust, mentions that she acted as an arbitrator in disputes between tribes. And this is genuinely remarkable when you think about it in like outside of the Germanic world, right?
Mhm.
In the Roman world, this is crazy. This is cuckoo fucking bananas, guys. Like a woman? Never. But we've already discussed. This is probably not that weird in the Germanic world, right?
It's really
Um,
not.
it's really not. It's weird. It's almost like women can do some of these things.
Go figure.
Anyway, again, not a society that's like, let's not get it twisted, okay? They're not feminists. I'm just saying, like, this is about as good as you're getting right in this particular period in this particular place, okay? Um. So anyway, intertribal disputes were a constant source of friction in the Germanic world, just like the Celtic world, and we've discussed that kind of thing before, right? Different, like, it's so easy to lump them in as like Hitler would like to do, and I'm throwing that out there, right? And all the white supremacists and neo-Nazis out there, like a great German race. No, Stop it. They were a bunch of
Kidding.
tribes, and half of them didn't speak the same fucking language. Okay, of
Mm.
course it's more complicated than that. Yes, they were stupid strong when they all fucking joined together, but like, how often did that happen? And even then, how often were they successful?
Mm-hmm.
Because of infighting, right? So the fact that she could do any of this is impressive. Okay.
Absolutely.
So they were saying her, right? It's the fact that they're like, look, we need to work on this shit together. She's like, bro, you cannot do this alone. Here you go. He's like, thank you so much. Anyway, so different tribes were, of course, had competing territorial claims, old feuds, blood feuds, conflicting interests, as you would, norm, because like essentially these are all independent little nation states, right? Honestly, like the Holy Roman Empire, when you think of like all those principalities and states, and you're like, oh Lord, and you kind of most people walk away from that part of history because they're like, nope. that's, that's honestly kind of what Germany had always been. It's
Yeah.
very they even became a unified anything. So, in normal circumstances, resolving these disputes required either the dominating of a stronger tribe over the weaker one, or lengthy negotiations between tribal leaders who were often deeply suspicious of each other from all the dominating. Having a neutral figure with recognized spiritual authority who could adjudicate these disputes was enormously valuable for maintaining coalition and cohesion, right?
Yeah.
That's what these CRSs are doing. They're not just dudes, right? They have no stake in this, and therefore, you listen, right? Can't be just any lady, of course, right?
Oh, of course not.
Of course not. But um, it's a role I do not believe, with the way their societies worked, that a guy could really fill, right?
No.
Um, so Veleda's ability to serve this role depended entirely on her being perceived as standing above tribal politics, literally, um, as someone whose judgments reflected divine wisdom rather than the interest of any particular group. Hence why a guy couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Because she doesn't have political claim to anything, right? So it's interesting that in the oppression of women here, you are also creating a space where they have all this power because of neutrality. She is Switzerland, in
Yes.
this scenario. But, well, she's actually more like the United Nations with this scenario. Because, like, Switzerland's just neutral. And even then, that's a more recent development in modern history. But this would be more like the United Nations of it all, right? Like, they're not supposed to take a side, right? They're just there to get everyone together and talk it out and come to a conclusion. So, it's supposed to be above it all, right? If we're using a secular example, which is clunky. So the fact that she was Bructeri rather than Batavian or Batavi was paradoxically useful here. She wasn't from Civilis' own tribe, which meant her endorsement of his leadership couldn't easily be dismissed as tribal favoritism, right? It's like she has no stakes in that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And her reputation clearly extended well beyond the Bructeri, because she's talked to all these people, right? He's also, let's point it back out. He was a Roman not that long ago. Many of these tribes were probably like, fucking traitor. And now all of a sudden he wants us to help him after he done fucked up.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I hope your kids enjoy being 69 by Brutus over there. She's like, yo, bro, they're 69ing your daughter too. He's like, oh yeah, that's right. Okay. So, that being said, her reputation also extended well beyond the Bructeri, giving her that cross-tribal credibility needed to arbitrate effectively. This diplomatic function made her, in a very practical sense, one of the key institutional structures holding this revolt together. Civilis provide military leadership and strategic vision, but Veleda provide the spiritual mandate and the neutral arbitrating authority that kept the coalition from fracturing amongst tribal lines. And let's just be clear, she must have spoke really well,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. She must have been a
Like,
great orator.
right, where people, I mean, like, yes, there's, you get a lot of attention and clout just from being who you, in her position, like the kind of person she was. But that's just so they'll listen to you.
Mm-hmm.
Convincing them,
Completely different
that's on you,
story.
babe.
What's particularly surprising about this period is watching how the Romans responded to Veleda, because they didn't simply dismiss her as a superstitious barbarian phenomenon. Roman commanders took her seriously enough to attempt to negotiate with her directly at certain points, which is an extraordinary acknowledgement of her real political power.
But it also shows that they didn't understand the system either,
Correct.
right? If they wouldn't
Correct.
have, you can't just go to her.
You can't
You,
negotiate with the gods. What are you talking about?
but also, like, she's, even if she didn't want this to end, she's not the one who put the soldiers out in the first place. You
Correct.
have to get, what Rome needed to do was fucking apologize. So, like,
Yep.
and admit that they were wrong, which they could not afford to do. But I just find that interesting. Like, so on the one that's like, oh wow, they respected her so much that they went to her. Yeah, but it also shows that they're colonizers and don't actually understand the system.
Correct.
Because if they did, they would know that that wasn't going to ever amount to anything, even if
Absolutely.
she wanted it to end.
So the fact that Romans were willing to send envoys to a Germanic seeress's tower to go through the elaborate protocol of the intermediary and to seek her involvement in negotiations tells you something important. By this stage of the revolt, Veleda was being treated by Rome as a genuine political actor, not merely a religious figure with influence over the barbarians. She had effective veto power, or at minimum, enormous influence over the decisions the Germanic coalition would make, and Rome knew it. If you wanted to negotiate with the coalition, you had to reckon with her. So, this Roman recognition of her power was itself a kind of amplification of it. Every time Rome sent envoys to her tower, it confirmed for the Germanic tribes watching that their seeress was someone even the empire had to take seriously. It was, unintentionally, Rome validating everything her own people believed about her. Veleda's early role in the revolt was thus layered and multifaceted in a way that goes well beyond the simple image of a prophetess cheering from the sidelines. She was a spiritual legitimizer, a diplomatic arbitrator, a psychological force multiplier, and a recipient of the revolt's greatest honors. By the height of the early revolt, she was arguably as important to its functioning as Civilis himself, just operating in a completely different register of power.
And that's where we will leave her this time, right? So, right now we're doing pretty good. Rome is going through the final throes of its year of four emperors, the year of 69ing at, and at. Veleda has made her debut. We've got the German tribes all unifying under this banner. They're kicking ass, and Rome has been humiliated enough. Well, their ass kicked enough that they're even willing to talk to a lady.
Oh my god!
They're actually willing to negotiate with a woman, and not because they have to, but because they actually came up with the idea themselves to try that. Like, that's how desperate they are.
Shocking.
So Valena's doing pretty good here. Our girl's doing pretty good. And that's where we're going to leave her for now. So we will continue this on later, perhaps next week. But stay tuned for part 2 and how the story of Veleda ends. If you like what you heard today, please give us a positive review on whatever platform you listen to the podcast on. It goes a long way for us to appease the algorithm gods and get this suggested to others just like you. The more we can connect to our fellow history nerds, the more we can build up a community and keep this show going.
Also, we have a Patreon where you can hang out with us and get exclusive content, like videos where we might try to make some ancient recipes, talk about topics that couldn't fit into the main arcs of the podcast, and just generally being batshit and dumpster fires, all for the price of a latte per month. Research materials and books cost a lot of money, and it takes a lot of time for us to create this show, so anything that you can provide would be a huge help.
We can't wait to see you again next week, and as always, thanks for listening. Bye for now.
Bye, guys.